for being here this evening. I greatly appreciate your time. I know that there are a lot of demands on everyone's time, and to be here and to participate in this public meeting is greatly appreciated. We do have an additional ask, that being a survey. We will provide information about at the end of the meeting here, but this presentation is to walk everyone through what it is that we are doing today and what it is that we are seeking your input on. Of course, this meeting is about our Historic Preservation Plan update. To give you a bit of background, to introduce myself, my name is John Southard. I'm the City of Tempe Historic Preservation Officer. I meet the Secretary of the Interior professional qualifications standards for both historian or history and architectural historian. I also serve on the Arizona Historic Sites Review Committee. That is a committee of appointed professionals who review National Register nominations and other preservation-related matters, typically prior to submission to the Department of Interior in Washington, D.C. I was formerly chair of the City of Scottsdale Historic Preservation Commission, a volunteer position. In addition to this, I serve on various boards, typically preservation related, the Heritage Square Foundation Board in Phoenix, Pueblo Grande Museum, etc. And I say that just to give some background and understanding as to who I am and what my professional and background is. We are very, very fortunate to have some incredibly talented consultants here to assist us with this historic preservation plan update. The city went through a request for qualifications process. Out of the firms that submitted, we selected Archaeological Consulting Services, or ACS, a Tempe-based firm. They are our lead consultant. They've partnered with Vinson Studio PLLC. Mark Vinson is the principal of Vinson Studio. Mark is an incredibly talented architect. He's a fellow of the American Institute of Architects, formerly worked for the city of Tempe, is incredibly familiar with our historic resources. With that, I'd like to introduce Andrea Gregory. She is the project manager for Archaeological Consulting Services, or ACS. Andrea is going to tell you a bit about herself and her colleagues on this project. Andrea, as you go along, once you introduce yourself, I will transition to the next slide, which is Tom, and then the next slide, which is Andy, and then the following slide, which is Mark.
Okay, well, thank you, John, and thanks to everyone who joined us tonight. As John mentioned, my name is Andrea Gregory, and I am the Cultural Resource Division Director at ACS. I have over 20 years of experience directing archaeology and historical inventory projects in Arizona, and have been involved with preparing cultural resource assessments, agency consultation, developing work plans, drafting MOAs and PAs, peer reviewing technical reports, conducting historic building and property inventories, and evaluating eligibility for those resources. I meet the Secretary of Interior standards for archaeology and history, and I served for 9 years on the Tempe Historic Preservation Commission. And as John mentioned, I'm the principal investigator and the project manager for the project. And we have Tom Jones, who is our historian for the project. He also has over 20 years of experience in archaeology and historic documentation. His experience includes historic artifact analysis, archival research. He's prepared historic building inventories and National Register nominations. He conducts interviews and oral histories. He also develops project-specific historic contexts focusing on research themes in Arizona. And they have included irrigation, transportation, roadside vernacular architecture, homesteading, flour milling, town site settlement and development. And he has participated in and prepared National Register nominations for historic districts in Tempe, Phoenix, and Tucson. Tom meets the Secretary of Interior standards for history. He is a former member of the Governor's Archaeology Advisory Commission and the Phoenix Historic Preservation Commission, and is a member of the Historic Archaeology Advisory Committee. And next we have Dr. Andrew Darling. Andy received his PhD in anthropology in 1998, and his principal field experience is in the American Southwest and Northern Mexico. In 2000, he joined the Gila River Indian Community's Cultural Resource Management Program, where he later became the department director for 6 years and assisted in establishing the Tribal Historic Preservation Office. Dr. Darling is a former member of the Governor's Archaeological Advisory Commission, and in 2012, he was the recipient of the Commission's Award for Excellence in Professional Archaeology. And Andy will be conducting tribal coordination for contributions to the Historic Preservation Plan. And finally, we have Mark Benson, as John mentioned, the city's first Historic Preservation Officer. He is a registered architect and certified planner with over 40 years of experience in architectural and urban design, municipal planning, and historic preservation, 30 of them with the city of Tempe. Mark was the city architect, and as the community's founding historic preservation officer, was instrumental in drafting Tempe's historic preservation ordinance. He's recognized by the American Institute of Architects with elevation to their National College of Fellows and with Arizona's Architects Medal, as well as several governor's awards for historic preservation. Mark is also the co-author of the award-winning Arizona Highways book, Landmark Buildings, Arizona's Architectural Heritage, principal author of the award-winning book Antico II, the mid-century architecture of Greater Phoenix's East Valley, and a major contributing author to the Arizona section of the Society of Architectural Historians' recent online publication, Archipedia. And Mr. Vincent is the historic architect for the project. And so most of our team live and or work in Tempe, a lot of us for decades. We see these resources every day, and historic preservation is very personal to us. And we want to hear about your connections to these resources and the unique places we have in Tempe, and to ensure that we can continue those stories into the future. So thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. We're so fortunate to have such a talented team of professionals working on this for us. It is a rarity that a municipality is able to engage a firm that is headquartered in that city and has so many professionals who are so intimately familiar with that city's resources. So we really are very fortunate here. I'd like to provide a program overview, give everyone on this meeting an idea of what it is that the Tempe Historic Preservation Office does from day to day. The Tempe Historic Preservation Office and Tempe Historic Preservation Commission came about as a result of the passage of the Tempe Historic Preservation Ordinance in 1995. The following year, the city of Tempe was named a certified local government. That is a designation that means that the city has a preservation ordinance, a preservation commission, etc., agrees to abide by state and federal preservation and cultural resource laws. And that is something that is in partnership with the Arizona State Historic Preservation Office and the National Parks Service. In 1997, the City Council approved a historic preservation plan for the city. The historic preservation plan and the ordinance that was passed in 1995 were both revised in 2000. That was the last revision up until a minor one recently for either document. So the purpose and intent of the historic preservation program, and this is taken from the ordinance, is to provide protection for significant properties and archaeological sites which represent important aspects of Tempe's heritage, to enhance the character of the community by taking such property by taking such properties and sites into account during development and to assist owners in the preservation and restoration of their properties. Now, the goals, and these come from the Tempe Historic Preservation Plan, are to identify and preserve and protect significant historic properties and archaeological sites, to foster economic vitality through preservation of properties which contribute to the historic character of the community, and to integrate historic preservation planning with that conducted by boards, commissions, neighborhood, and redevelopment planning efforts as a means to protect and enhance community heritage and complement city redevelopment plans. In terms of operations, what does the Tempe Historic Preservation Office staff do? Office staff being myself. I staff the Historic Preservation Commission, a group of appointed professionals and at-large members who both advise the City Council on preservation-related matters and act as a deciding body on historic preservation-related cases. We maintain the Tempe Historic Property Register, the Historic Eligible Classification List, and the Archaeologically Sensitive Classification List. That is, properties that are designated historic locally and have a zoning overlay associated with them, properties that are determined by the Historic Preservation Commission to be eligible for listing, and properties that are known to be archaeologically sensitive. The office processes applications for alterations to historic properties. These alterations could be additions, could be replacing windows with a different type of window, could be as significant as demolition. The Tempe Historic Preservation Office also ensures compliance with the Arizona Antiquities Act, a law that requires a Arizona Antiquities Act permit be issued for ground disturbance within known archaeological sites. The office also participates in Section 106 reviews. Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act is a safeguard to ensure that projects with a federal nexus, that being funding, permitting, etc., do not have an adverse effect on the historic built environment or archaeological resources, and if there is an adverse effect, ensure that there is proper mitigation of that adverse effect. The office also consults with the 4 Southern tribes and other parties. The 4 Southern tribes are the Ak-Chin Indian community, the Gila River Indian community, the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian community, and the Tohono O'odham Nation. And the office coordinates with the Arizona State Historic Preservation Office, Arizona State Museum, and other agencies. So what does all of this mean in real life? What does it mean to citizens of Tempe? What can they see as a result of our efforts? One example is the beautification of Oidbad Duag, or Tempe Butte. This has been a multi-step effort. The power lines, which have been in place in one form or another for over a century on the southwest slope up to the peak of the butte, were undergrounded in 2016. We worked with city partners to ensure that the water reservoirs on the butte were sensitively upgraded and painted in a manner that would obscure them to the greatest degree possible in that setting. And most notably, we're able to work with both internal and external partners to remove the communications towers from atop the butte. The butte is listed in the Tempe Historic Property Register, the National Register of Historic Places, and is a traditional cultural property for the 4 Southern tribes. Another example is the rehabilitation of the Charles Hayden House. It is the oldest Euro-American building in the Salt River Valley. Many of you may know it as Montes La Casa Vieja. It closed on November 17th, 2014. That is Montes. Coincidentally, the day that I started in this position, we recently, and by recently I mean within the last several months, completed the rehabilitation of the Hayden House in association with the 100 Mill development, an office building that is under construction at this time and a hotel building that will likely be under construction at some point in the future. The Hayden House is now owned by the city. The developer funded the rehabilitation and deeded the property to the city. So now we now have additional protection for that critically important historic resource. Another example here, we have a 1982 photo of the Hayden Flour Mill. Looks a bit different than it does today. We were able to list the flour mill, which is a city-owned property, in the Tempe Historic Property Register, thereby affording additional protections than it had prior to its listing. And this is exciting, we were just able to execute a contract with an Adobe specialist, actually the same gentleman who worked on the Hayden House, to complete emergency stabilization of the Gonzales Martinez house on First Street, immediately west of the railroad tracks. This is the second oldest building in Tempe and the third oldest building in the entire Salt River Valley. And this is our latest project that is just getting underway, the rehabilitation of the 1924 Tempe Depot and the redevelopment of the depot property. All of the non-historic additions to the depot, the 1980s additions, were recently demolished. The developer of the redevelopment project has agreed to preserve and rehabilitate the Tempe Depot, list the depot in the Tempe Historic Property Register, and provide a facade and limited airspace conservation easement, in addition to completing archaeological data testing and data recovery at the site, which could be very important in terms of better understanding Tempe's history and prehistory. And something that the office has been working very hard on lately is the partnership with our partners at the Four Southern Tribes. The city recently passed a land acknowledgement. In addition, just a couple of weeks ago, the Historic Preservation Ordinance was revised to ensure that there is permanent representation of the Four Southern Tribes Cultural Resource Working Group on the Historic Preservation Commission, something that is very exciting. So that was a discussion of the office's purpose and how that translates to on-the-ground results. Now, what everyone is here to discuss is the preservation plan update. We're very fortunate that the mayor and city council provided the funding to allow for a evaluation of the current preservation plan and an update to ensure that it accurately reflects the desires of the community and current rules, regulations, and laws. So what's the rationale for the update? Well, the current plan that was referenced at the beginning of this presentation is frankly inadequate. I say inadequate because it is really a glorified mission or vision statement. It is 2 pages long if you print it in a generous font. It has served us well, but it does need to be updated. It needs to be more substantive. It needs to provide more clarity and more guidance for the office and those that we work with. Another component of this project is a survey and inventory of properties citywide constructed between 1961 and 1975. This is a much needed supplement to the survey and inventory that we have of single-family residential neighborhoods constructed between 1945 and 1960. That survey and inventory was completed 20 years ago. In preservation, survey and inventories are very important because in order to establish whether or not a property is significant, we must have an understanding of its place within the universe of similar properties. So if we're looking at a mid-century ranch home, for instance, is it significant in comparison to the many other mid-century ranch homes that exist? In what context was it built? Is there anything significant about the architect? Is there anything significant about the design? What, if anything, differentiates that property from the many, many other similar properties in existence? This is a much needed update, something that we're very excited about. In addition to this, ACS is also completing a survey and inventory for properties within what is referred to as the urban core, properties that were constructed prior to 1961. In terms of this category, we have an understanding of the single-family residential districts and neighborhoods built prior to 1961, but we don't have a good assessment of the entirety of the built environment constructed before 1961. So this will greatly supplement our knowledge. So what are the objectives of this update process? We hope to evaluate the existing plan, the ordinance, and the operations of the office and the commission to determine what successes there are and what challenges or opportunities for improvement may exist. We also hope to review the existing plan and ordinance to ensure that applicable laws and regulations passed and approved subsequent to the last update, that being 2000 in the case of the plan, are satisfactorily addressed. One of the more notable examples would be Proposition 207, which was passed in 2006. That has raised questions across the state as to designation of local properties and local districts, and whether or not that is something that now requires perhaps additional paperwork and authorization as compared to what was required in the pre-Proposition 207 environment. We hope to identify and, when feasible, incorporate the goals and priorities identified in this public outreach process and during stakeholder consultation sessions. After the public outreach and the stakeholder consultation sessions, research by the consultant, discussions internally, we hope to draft clear plan updates to reflect, when feasible, the goals and priorities of the city, the public, and outside stakeholder groups in consulting agencies, to include the tribes, the Arizona State Museum, the State Historic Preservation Office, etc. And finally, upon completion of the updated plan, we hope to implement the policies and practices identified in that plan. So what are the issues for consideration? What items are we seeking public input on? What items will we be taking to various stakeholder groups and discussing internally? There is a great deal that needs to be discussed. There are a lot of communities that are very innovative in terms of preservation here in Arizona, Flagstaff, Phoenix, Tucson. Certainly, there have been preservation plan updates recently in Phoenix and Mesa and Glendale. We have a lot to learn from their programs. Certainly, we have a lot of experience to draw from internally in terms of what processes perhaps could be improved, or what policies may be enacted in order to better the program and ensure that it delivers results for all of its stakeholders, positive results. Issues for consideration include the process of designation. So there has been discussion of district designations, particularly in the context of Proposition 207. What percentage of property owners is needed or is appropriate to move forward a district nomination? What is it that we use? What criteria to consider eligibility, et cetera? Those are things that we're seeking input on, not only from the public and from stakeholder groups, but from officials such as those with the city attorney's office. Design guidelines. Design guidelines are a very important tool for preservation. When a neighborhood is designated, historic design guidelines specific to that neighborhood are created. That document, the design guidelines that is crafted with the assistance of property owners in that neighborhood, then approved by the Historic Preservation Commission, that is what the Historic Preservation uses to evaluate whether or not proposed alterations, additions, et cetera, are appropriate for that neighborhood. Demolition, specifically the requirements in place for evaluating requested demolition of designated buildings and buildings that are not designated but potentially eligible. There have been changes in other communities to their processes related to demolition. There have been enhanced review standards put in place. As an example, in the city of Phoenix, buildings 50 years or older must be reviewed for eligibility prior to issuance of a demolition permit. If determined to be eligible, then there's a process that plays out from there. There's also the question of the stay of demolition. So should a property that is listed in the Tempe Historic Property Register, for instance, should the property owner apply for demolition and be denied by the Historic Preservation Commission, there is at the moment a 6-month stay of demolition that follows that denial. That is not consistent with some other cities, Phoenix among them, which has a 1-year stay of demolition, or in the case of landmarks or properties with exceptional significance, a 3-year stay of demolition. So we want to ensure that we are protecting the historic resources in Tempe and allowing the community sufficient time to attempt to identify alternatives to demolition. Internal review and compliance measures. How does the office interact with colleagues at the city? What processes are working well? What may be implemented that would assist us to partner with colleagues at the city and their projects? We want to ensure that we are compliant with all applicable laws and regulations. And while doing so, we want to ensure that we operate in an efficient manner that does not unnecessarily delay or otherwise burden our colleagues and their projects. Stewardship of city-owned historic structures is another area that we're seeking input on. The city does own many historic resources. At the moment, there's not differentiation as to how an historic property is treated if it is owned by a private party or if it is owned by the city. One of the questions that has come up repeatedly is what responsibility does the city have? Is it above and beyond that of private property owners? What measures need to be in place to ensure that the city is serving as a good steward of city-owned resources? And that does not include just the built environment, but also cultural resources such as Tempe Butte. Communication and notification processes, not only communication regarding applications for alterations, additions, et cetera, or regarding potential designation, but notification of the fact that a property is designated. We want to ensure that when someone is buying a property in an historic neighborhood, they are aware of the fact that there is a zoning overlay and there are additional review and approval processes in place. We want to ensure that to maintain the integrity of the district and to provide fair notice to potential property owners. How do we go about effectively doing that? That is something at the moment that has created challenges not only for the city of Tempe, but other municipalities throughout the state. There is not yet a universally accepted best practice as to how to go about ensuring that the status of an historic property is known to all and very easily accessible. And finally, issues for consideration that are of importance to the community. What is it that is not on this list? What is it that those here would like us to consider as we move forward with this preservation plan update? What issues are important to you, to your neighbors? What issues do you want to ensure that since we have this incredible team in place, ensure that we address and address thoroughly as we go through this process? And this is the additional ask that I referred to at the beginning of the presentation. We would like your input as to what your preservation related goals and priorities are. What is it that you would like us to look at for this? Keeping in mind that a preservation plan is just that. It is a plan. It is a document that provides a roadmap for operations. It is not an ordinance that has any regulatory authority. It is not granular in nature. It does not specify which properties are to be designated, etc. But it does provide a roadmap for operations. How is it that we move forward in the next 25 years of operations for the Tempe Historic Preservation Office? I ask that everyone here participate in this survey because it will be of great help to us as we move forward in this process. It is an online survey that you can take at your convenience. It will be available online through May 10th. The web address is here. I suspect that those who have registered will receive a link via email. I will confirm that with neighborhoods, but I suspect that that is the case. Should you wish to learn more about the preservation plan update and what it is that we are doing, please visit tempe.gov/preservation plan. The link is here. There is additional information available for you. And with that, I thank you. I thank you for your time. I appreciate your interest in preservation, and I look forward to hearing from everyone who is attending this virtual meeting with respect to what their priorities are, what they would like to see addressed, etc. With that, I'd be happy to address any questions. I see it looks as if there are some comments in chat.
Hey, John, this is Shauna. I was just sharing the website for everyone. So if anyone has questions, feel free to raise your hand and we can call on you if you'd like to ask it, or you can also put it in the chat and then we can have John answer it from there as well.
Absolutely, and we would be more than happy to address any questions that you may have. I would like to note that the best opportunity for providing substantive input is going to be the web survey. There are, in addition to what they call dotocracy, or a virtual exercise that allows you to demonstrate your personal priorities, there are also open-ended questions that you can respond to, and that allows you the opportunity to provide very in-depth substantive input. So I'm looking, I don't see Any hands? I see, well, we have a question. Ken asks regarding number 4 of item 3 of the goal, assist in making ownership of an historic property as beneficial as possible, help by designating properties to the Tempe Register and assisting their owners to obtain incentives for preservation by rehabilitation, restoration, or maintenance, develop financial and other incentives with the city that will encourage the preservation of historic properties. Since the year 2000, what financial and other incentives have been given to encourage the preservation of historic properties? There may be large developers getting incentives and deals from the city of Tempe, but what about homeowners of historic properties? Please give some examples of what is available. Ken, that's a fantastic question, and incentives are, of course, a very important topic of discussion, one that I don't believe I mentioned, but one that is included in the survey. Neighboring communities do have incentives. The city of Phoenix has grant opportunities for owners of properties, both commercial and residential. That is a bond-funded grant opportunity. Those bonds were approved by Phoenix voters. The city of Scottsdale has what they call the Historic Residential Exterior Rehabilitation Program. It provides grants to homeowners in designated neighborhoods or homeowners of individually designated properties up to 50% of the project value or a maximum of $7,500. That is funded each year by the City of Scottsdale City Council. They allocate funds from the general fund. I've been in this role since 2014. I apologize, I can't speak to incentive programs at the city prior to that. I can tell you that at this point, short of assistance with National Register listing for eligible neighborhoods, National Register listing being a means of owners within those neighborhoods, owners of contributing properties who qualify to obtain a property tax reclassification. At the moment, there are no direct incentives available through the city of Tempe for individual property owners, let's say of an individual single family residence or within a historic district. There certainly has been discussion. There are a number of programs in Arizona and elsewhere that are innovative. Those can be direct financial incentives. Those can be fee waivers. Those can be loans from a revolving fund. There are a number of different mechanisms, and those are certainly all items that we hope to explore during this process and incorporate into the plan. It is important, as noted by this component of the existing preservation plan, the property owners have an incentive to preserve their property. So I thank you for that question. That is a very good inquiry and one that is a very important topic that we will be looking at. So Sean, I do not see raised hands or additional questions in chats. It looks as if we do have a question.
Yeah, I was going to say the chat just came in, but I haven't seen any hands either.
Okay. So Marianne would like to know, for archaeology designated areas, what information are you getting to identify those sites? I can assure you that that is a wormhole that I frequently go down. There is a great deal of information, not just the State Archaeological Site Database, which is known as site, but there is a lot of written information, great literature, if you will, available through consultants and other sources. There's also both primary and secondary source historic research that can be completed. That is something that we are very much aware of in terms of a need, in terms of being a priority, and this is a separate process. There will undoubtedly be a separate meeting for this, but the city has also brought on a consultant, that being Logan Simpson, to prepare a citywide cultural resources inventory and draft a blanket monitoring, discovery, and treatment plan for archaeological resources. So that is something that is very important. Rob would like to know, what role will environmental history play in this process? I suppose that could be approached a number of different ways. Here, one of the most important factors were, of course, taking into account the significance of landscapes, significance of settings, for instance, flood irrigated neighborhoods, the mature vegetation, et cetera. Also taking into account the importance of land forms and landscapes as cultural properties, and specifically as relates to the 4 Southern tribes. So environmental history certainly is an important consideration here. If you look contextually, of course, environmental history is really a very important component of understanding Tempe history. Why is it that both prehistorically and historically individuals were drawn to Tempe? Well, it's the river, the 2 buttes that constrict the flow, the fact that the underflow is raised up. You have a hard bottom crossing to allow you to cross from south of the river to north, et cetera. The soils here, the availability of irrigation water, all of that, those are all very important contextual pieces that need to be factored into consideration of a property and its significance. Lisa writes, for communication on eligible or designated areas, the assessor's office would be the place to reach out to, since realtors, lenders, title companies are going to look there. And Lisa, thank you. The assessor's office and certainly potentially the recorder's office, if there is something that has been explored to some degree, there's more investigation that's needed, but there could be something filed that would turn up in a title search when somebody is researching a property, considering purchasing a property, et cetera. There are some measures in place, for instance, sign toppers in historic districts. That is a legal notification that you're entering into a district or a place with an overlay. But there are other steps that can be taken. I appreciate the suggestion. I think the assessor, the recorder, and working with realtor groups, outreach, that's going to be very important as well. So thank you, Lisa.
John, looks like we have a hand. Scott, if you wanted to go ahead and ask your question.
Sure. I have more of a comment than a question. I just wanted to say that, having spent most of my career in meetings with, whether in private sector or in, working formally in Tennessee state government, I can't remember a time I've been on the call with so many people who are so qualified to be on the call. So I just wanted to say that really shows how seriously Tempe takes this. And I want to say I appreciate all the effort.
Well, thank you, Scott. We appreciate you being here. I appreciate the comment. As I said, we're so fortunate to have these consultants on board and to have the Historic Preservation Commission that we do. We are fortunate in Tempe in the sense that there are a lot of cultural resource professionals. Our commission at the moment includes the former state historic preservation officer who served in that role for 25 years. It includes my predecessor in this role. It includes the City of Phoenix archaeologist. There are 2 attorneys, a real estate agent. We're just very fortunate in that sense. And so thank you for your comment, Scott.
We do still have time if anyone else has any questions or comments for John. And if nothing else, as John mentioned, you do have the websites there. I put them in the chat as well. So the comments will be open for 2 weeks. And then also for anyone feel free to share on the website that we provided. The recording of the meeting will be posted there as well for anyone that missed.
Absolutely. And I'd like to take this opportunity again to thank everyone. I know that your time is very valuable, and I greatly appreciate the fact that you're here and so interested in preservation policy in the city of Tempe. So thank you.